I love it. It's so random. So wide ranging, the ads that we get served up on this on our platforms, don't you think?
Yeah, great.
All right. And with that, everyone stay tuned for Jenny Johnson.
I'm Jenny R. Johnson. I'm a Canadian artist. I'm an oil painter. I'm a huge geek, and I've sort of taken those two loves and put them together, and I make really realistic paintings and large scale of all of my favorite characters and moments from pop culture. Particularly, I have a particular interest in Star Trek too.
Now, before we dive into the painting of Star Trek, there's two things there in that intro. Are you flaunting that you're Canadian to a bunch of Americans?
Yeah, seriously.
It seemed kind of a flex.
Well, to be fair, as a Canadian, we don't really flex. It's not really our thing. So it's it's more just a like sort of geographical, this is where I am.
Gotcha.
And this
and
is
then
sort of
R was very strong R. Is there a Jenny Johnson out there you don't like? Because there's another John Checker out there. I haven't met him, but we do different things.
No, there are a couple other Jenny Johnsons out there. There's like a volleyball player and another painter actually. So I decided I needed to. Yeah, although I don't normally introduce myself with that much of a piratey R
thing. I liked it. It was great. Yeah. There's another Don Schechter out there. He's got one less H in the last name. We both are writing books, and his books are very different than mine, so it's confusing to some people. But
I've met the other Don Schechter, and I like him way more than you. Let me just say, just way more than you.
We're gonna let that.
Are you guys SG-1 fans at all?
I watched it. I wasn't super into it. Why is that?
There's a joke in the show, Jack O'Neill, 2 L's, the other Jack O'Neill. Yeah.
I'm more the Tinnifer, the Tinnifer reference? Was it Tinnifer from the Marvel? No. Blank stairs.
Ish. Yeah.
Let's cut that one out, everybody. All right, let's talk about...
This is what you're going to have to deal with, Don. This is what dealing with Don is like, Jenny.
So I first came across your work, I don't know how, in the Twitter X-verse, but I have hanging over in my office here one of your works of Benny Russell looking out over a typewriter, looking out and seeing the reflection of Cisco, which I absolutely loved and immediately saw and bought and loved it. What stood out for me is that you were talking openly about how you came into liking fandom. So maybe tell us a little bit about that story and your experience with Trek and what happened.
Yeah, well, I guess it was sort of, a crystal in the beginning of just basically loving anything my dad loved. And he used to watch Star Trek, like the original series, on Saturday mornings on CBC on the weekends. And I remember watching it, and I was so young at that point that I knew I liked it, and I knew because he liked it, I should like it. But it was also kind of scary, and I remember very specifically seeing the Horta for the first time and being like, "This is terrifying." So Star Trek it wasn't so much that I grew up as a big fan when I was younger, but it was just always kind of on the periphery. And I was a big reader. I was a really imaginative kid, but I also was an ADHD kid in the 80s and a girl. So, I would blurt things out. I didn't sort of have the filter that would necessarily keep me, under the radar with the other kids. So I was picked on pretty badly from about grade 2 right through grade 7. And as, of course, you're getting up into junior high, it got worse. Like it just became to the point where I was like hiding in the library.
Oh no, these were Canadian kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one teacher that was like, this particular year, I don't know what was in the water this year, but this is a particularly rough group of girls.
Yeah, as you get older, it's rougher, right?
Yeah. And to the point where I just kind of was trying to separate myself from it. So I was hanging out in the library at lunch and, like eating my lunch alone, like that kind of. And then I go home in the evenings and I just be watching TV and just kind of, trying to be okay. And there was one day that I was just flipping through the channels and I saw that guy from Reading Rainbow. and I was like, oh, hey, and he's like crawling around in the mud. What's going on here? And then I started watching and I realized that like I didn't really know. This was about 1991. So Star Trek The Next Generation had been on the air for several years at that point.
Right.
But I guess I didn't really have, I kind of knew that it was a thing, but I'd never seen it. So I was like, wait a minute. Oh, this is like that new Star Trek show. And then I watched the rest of the episode and was, it was The Enemy was the first one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and he's like stuck on Glarn and Cora with the Romulan. And I was just like,
and that's the episode that's sung to you.
That was, yeah. And there was actually a little while that I sort of didn't see it again. I don't know. And then the next episode that I watched was Skin of Evil, of all things. I know. But there's something about that
That's
episode.
That's where Tasha dies. Trevor.
Yeah.
I know, Trevor, you're not great with the names.
No, I saw it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I get to the end of this episode and I don't really know these characters, but I'm crying. I'm just like, this is the greatest show I've ever seen.
Oh.
And yeah.
And how old were you then? You were
I was about sort of right around the point where I was about 12 years old. 11,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's as I, and from then on I was watching it because it was on 5 days a week in syndication at that point.
Sure.
And I was watching it religiously every day. I started, recording it on VHS. And it became like my world because all of a sudden I had this other place to go, like.
So it was a distraction from the sort of bullying school.
Absolutely.
So it served that purpose. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the next year, there was a girl who briefly moved to my town. And this was a small town too. I grew up in a town of a village of 1,000 people. So the kids that I went to primary with, I graduated high school with. So
there were 3,000 people in my high school.
Yeah. You got out, right?
Yeah.
Oh
my gosh. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah.
Do they ever, you have some fame here. Do they ever try and reach out to you on social media? And do you block them?
No, I don't block them because it's just, again, small town. You can't. But the funny thing is that the number of some of those people who have turned out to be closet Star Trek fans who have bought work from me and
were the same people that bullied you.
Absolutely.
Ridiculous. See, now I'm angry for you.
It's sort of, I don't know, everything kind of I feel like it all happens for a reason, I mean, it made me a very empathetic person. And it led me to finding a group of friends who were a couple of years older, but in my same school, who I made friends with this girl who had an older cousin, and she kind of liked Star Trek, and we were she was into Dungeons and Dragons, so we were kind of like doing a little cultural exchange, as you do. And her older cousin found out that I had VHS tapes of Star Trek. And so he and his friends wanted to borrow them. And that led me to becoming their friends. Then she moved away and then I was just with them. And I mean, those are friends now that I've had for like 30 plus years. Yeah, like those are the real ones. So yeah, like it really.
Have you ever thought about what it was, during that time when you were getting attached to Star Trek that made it such a good distraction? Is it just that like it could have been anything for anyone that they get obsessive over as we do as teenagers that we get into? Or
I mean, a little bit, I mean, there was a point where I was really into Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, but
Trevor's still into
fair,
that.
Yeah. But
isn't she married to Ringo? Of course, of course I
am. Star Trek and TNG in particular, that group of people, that crew, like the characters were such a family. And I mean, and now we know in retrospect that the actors themselves were just loved each other. And obviously that came across. So there was that, like I felt like part of the crew, I felt like, yeah, like, and then sort of having this friend group of chosen friends,
right?
Because that really wasn't a thing growing up, right? You just were friends with the people that you grew up with. So it's yeah, like in that chosen family, that idea really, really spoke to me. you know. And I also at that point, I was really interested in space, like a lot of those lunches when I was eating by myself in the library. I was also well, at that point it was encyclopedias, so I was like looking up everything I could about being an astronaut or going to space, or you know, the theory of relativity in encyclodias in the library.
I feel like we all did that in the 80s and maybe early
Right?
90s, and then we lost it all. I was explaining to my kid, like, we had like everything was space toys, and we had winter gloves that changed color in the snow and all this stuff that was so cool and futuristic, and now no one cares.
Yeah, no one
That's
cares
anymore.
because they have these cool like phones that
Yeah,
are things that we would have killed for when we were kids.
yeah,
Yeah, fair,
exactly, exactly.
So
So I
how
want
do you-
to
go ahead.
I want to ask something real quick,
Yeah.
is to maybe step back from science fiction and talk specifically about painting.
Yeah.
With ADHD and painting,
Hmm.
your that's got to be difficult. Also, second part to that question, this one will be a little elaborate, so excuse me.
No problem.
And a lot of things, I'm a few years older than you, especially growing up during that era. I saw a lot of gatekeeping around everything, gatekeeping that kept women out. Video games, science fiction, music, many art forms. I was a club DJ for a long time. There was a documentary
wow.
that played at TIFF last year that was specifically about female DJs across the world today, and how up until the last 10 years they were just pushed out. They were so it sounds like you've had to deal with a lot of that, and I would imagine that a lot of that even exists in painting itself, where I've heard from a lot of painters that they believe that there's this very strict, very disciplined approach to it, that it can't just be about self-expression. That there is a very, it's almost like, you're a samurai, and that sounds very intimidating.
Hmm. Yeah. Just to speak to that, I mean, I went to art college, so I definitely experienced a lot of not just the I don't want to call it
Yes.
misogyny necessarily, but the
You can call it misogyny. It's fine.
yeah, you're right. Yeah. But also that kind of, this is what painting is, this is what art is. And like, I remember very specifically being in a critique, and if anybody, like anyone who's been to art school knows that the critiques are basically just designed to like tear you down. Like that's and to just sort of get you used to being torn down, which is really, really weird.
It's called bullying.
Oh yeah. You know, and for whatever the project was, we just had to paint something. And I found this great picture of an elephant, and I painted this gigantic, like 4 foot by 5 foot elephant. That was just realistic. I painted it from a photo. It was really well, it was well done. It wasn't like super creative, but I remember very specifically this guy in my class standing up to do his sort of, what do you think? And he's like, I just don't get it. Like, I just like it. It's nice. It's attractive. I wanted to paint something that I liked. And that sort of, I mean, it was really crazy coming out of art school and feeling like even the idea that I wanted to make work for people to buy was like cuckoo bananas. Like, no, you have to go and get grants and get into galleries, and if people buy your work, then amazing. But you can't just be a commercial artist. Like, that's crazy. So
I have a friend that just real quick just got her first painting into a gallery show, and I am witnessing her having the biggest existential crisis of her life right now.
Can I tell you something? So my background was in music, and so I went to graduate school right after undergrad, and I have a master's in composition. And I used to write music, and I would spend my time splitting between music and film related stuff. But for grad school, I did music, I wrote music, it was performed. And the very first real gig I got was someone who said, I want to pay you to write music for me, for what I do. That was the last time I wrote music, essentially. I mean, I've scored some films, but like I didn't want to do that because then it wasn't for me anymore.
I get it.
you know? So it was really hard. I was like, oh, wow. Well, first of all, they didn't teach you how to make a living doing, you know, the type of composition I was doing.